Let's go. We're going to follow. Hi guys. We're live. We're going to go out and have a nice discussion today about Joseph. Hello guys. Hello crew. Hi April, the camel.
Hello.
Hello.
My name's Shannon. I'm the stage manager. This is your mic. Yeah. Are we ready?
There's Charlie. And Hannah. Let's get her debut. Here we go, Hannah.
Hello, everyone. Please give a warm welcome to Director of Development, Charlie Ludden.
Yes!
All right, how's everybody doing today? Good. Oh, it's a little different than being on stage for a show. I like this part right here.
And I am the location pastor at Crossings Mayfair, just up the road from here at Penn and Northwest Expressway.
Great. Yeah, give a round of applause. So if you walked in, you're like, what's happening? I'll explain a little bit. When Michael decided to do this show, he said, I need some help. So instead of just coming up and doing the whole show and blocking like he normally would, he decided to reach out to various religious leaders around our area to get their take on this story. Is it good to do a musical about biblical people? Is it, are there the things you don't do, things you can do, all that kind of stuff. So instead of us making it up as we're on our own, we decided to reach out to all these religious leaders to get their intake and their inputs. And what they told us was so many fascinating things. A little bit of my background, I was a children's minister for 4 years as well as a youth minister. So I have told this story many, many times, but there's so many biblical stories that we think are children's stories, and maybe you have to explain a little bit. Like one of the stories we always tell the kids is buy them little toys is Noah's Ark. And they go, great, but what happens in that story? You have to explain when you're done with the fun part. It's difficult. But going back to this story, tell me what makes the Joseph story so special. What tell me about this?
I think one of the things that makes the Joseph story so special is it's full of our lives, right? Like there are ups and downs and twists and turns, and there's family drama, and there's a reason they made a musical about it, right? Like it is a good story. It tells well. You can read it well from start to finish. But I think it's just emblematic of real life. That Joseph is this incredible biblical figure, but even throughout his life, he has ups and downs. He's thrown into pits. He's put in prison. He's treated unfairly. His brothers don't like him. It is literally a microcosm of kind of just life. And I think we can learn a lot through the Joseph story about our life and how it pans out and how God intervenes in certain situations. And even if I think you're not a faith-based person, I come to it that way. I'm a pastor. But even if you're not, I think there are valuable lessons we learn from the story of Joseph.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's most interesting to me is we talk about family lineages, and you have Joseph's father, Jacob, being kind of I wouldn't say the start, but kind of one of the stars of sibling rivalries. I know the kid, I always related to Esau, because I was larger, not as hairy, but I was larger around there, so you had that sibling rivalry. So I was always like, well, Jacob, just rude. Esau got cheated out of everything, but you see that family sibling rivalry go straight into the story. So how does that kind of translate? You see these patterns and biblically, this translation of family drama continuing on.
Oh yeah, I think the first few chapters of the story of Joseph are what not to do as a parent. All right, so if you want to know what not to do as a parent, go read the first few chapters of the story of Joseph. Joseph's father picks a favorite, a very obvious favorite of all of his children. If you're a parent, you might be able to relate and realize that that's not going to turn out well for anyone. And I think it is also a lesson on kind of how these things in our families can be passed down from generation to generation. Some of those things are very good. We learn very valuable things from our parents and our grandparents. But we also carry some of that baggage with us from our family as well. And so I think that's a good lesson as we go through to see how it played out in Joseph's father's life, but then also in his own life moving forward, and how that has just kind of been passed down from one generation to the next.
Absolutely. One of the things that I told the group yesterday, I had I won't say a dream because that's too much into the story, but I had a thought the other day of how we talk about Jacob being the prodigal son, and then the story continuing on with Joseph, he almost becomes the prodigal father, coming back and going to his son and making the long journey again. It's like, man, Jacob, you're going to take a lot of journeys. So it's those kind of fun things. Tell me something that you wish, hopefully this audience doubles and triples by the time it starts, but what you want them to take from this story that they're about to hear today, and when they get done, probably 3:30, 3:40, we have some time. What do you want them to take away after the story?
Yeah. To me, one of the incredible lessons of the story of Joseph is something that I touched on at the beginning, which is just that this story has so many ups and downs. And when we think about Joseph, of course, we think of the coat, and then we think of him being sold into slavery, and when we think of his rise through Egypt, and how at the end of the story, he's in this really incredible place. He's able to kind of bless his family and his homeland, and he is just, he has a seat of honor at the end of the story. And he is this well-known biblical figure for a reason. But I think we often think of that ending, and we forget about all of the kind of terrible things that happened to Joseph in that story. Like, again, his brothers throw him in a pit, and that was the second option besides just killing and get rid of him. That's what his brothers wanted.
That was the mercy person.
Yeah, that was the first plan, and then thankfully Reuben says, no, let's not do that. So they decided to throw him in a pit, then they decided to sell him. He works that situation, God kind of intervenes in his life and brings him to another place. And then Potiphar's wife takes a swipe at him. He's thrown in jail after that. So now he's back in jail, pit, and then jail. And then all of these situations, I just think sometimes we get in these positions in our lives where we're tempted to say, I thought my life would be better, or I thought this would be easier. And I think when we look at people like Joseph, we see how many difficult situations were in his life, but that those difficult situations didn't affect what would happen at the end, right? That he still has this moment at the end where God has worked in his life to bring him to a position. So my encouragement to you, I take away for today, would be that maybe if you're in one of those moments that feels like a pit, realize that the journey is long, that there are things that are going to happen from this point forward, and who knows what you will think about that pit in 10 to 15 years. There's even a kind of a small byline in the story where Joseph at the beginning seems very arrogant in the biblical story. He's willing to just walk up to his brothers and say, I had this dream where you guys all bow down to me. It was crazy. And the brothers, it's not going to go very well. It's not going to go well, right? He's a younger brother, and the older brothers are like, oh, we're going to bow down to you? Let's throw you in a pit, right? So Joseph has this kind of bravado. And who knows what maybe this pit scenario, Joseph comes up and he realizes that maybe he should approach life differently, right? So I just think about the ups and downs of life and how we can look at the story of Joseph and realize that the journey is long, and that just because we may feel like we're in the pit or we're in a place that we don't understand, that doesn't mean that God's not working, and that doesn't mean that the situation will be like that forever.
That's great. I pulled out my phone, not being rude, guys. I'm actually pulling up some questions that I had. But one of the questions, you mentioned this earlier about the dreams, especially in the founding stories and the Genesis and everything else in the early books, there's a lot of conversation about dreams and the importance of dreams, especially in this story. So can you talk a little bit about the various dreams that take place, especially for Joseph, and what kind of impact and the strength of the dream to some of these leaders of what's going to happen next, or why they trusted him?
Yeah, absolutely. So especially in this Old Testament text, these dreams really come about, kind of could also be translated as visions, right? They recognize them immediately as messages. Right? They immediately say, this happened to me, I had this dream, I had this vision, and I need to know what it means. And they're so adamant to know what it means because they know that it's a message. Someone is trying to tell them something. Joseph knows who it is. In fact, when he's in jail and he has these other dreams from his fellow jailees, they tell him about some of his dreams, and he says, like, hey, listen, nobody but God can interpret them, but if you tell them to me, maybe I can help. And so we kind of hear implied that through that situation, God helps Joseph interpret those dreams, which then leads him to this big dream that Pharaoh has about the skinny cows and the fat cows. And so he says, I had this dream. All of his wise men say, we can't interpret that. We have no idea what that means. Who on earth can we find that could do this sort of thing? And that's where one of Joseph's fellow compatriots back in jail says, oh, I knew a guy. he interpreted a dream for me once. Maybe he could do that for you. So they called Joseph, and Joseph again, maybe as I talked about earlier, maybe the pit changed his ego a little bit because it humbled him a little bit, right? So in this moment, he approaches Pharaoh and he says the same thing. I can't interpret the dream, but God can. I know who can. So why don't you tell it to me? And again, we'll see if God kind of reveals. And there we see God working through Joseph in this situation, again, to kind of set himself and his family up and kind of redeem this pit and this jail scenario. And now in this moment, we see it play out, that this has been part of his journey to bring him to this moment, to be able to interpret those dreams in front of these people.
Absolutely. And it wasn't a luxurious job to be the translator of the dreams. You know, tell us a little bit more about what could happen with some of your...
I mean, there's some famous Old Testament dreams where people do not get the interpretation they like. Kings are pretty powerful people, and they have a certain way of operating, and they like to hear things they like to hear. And so they would have approached people and said, hey, tell me what this means. And if the person gave them an unfavorable interpretation, they could be killed. So Joseph is kind of putting himself out on a ledge here in front of Pharaoh to say, again, maybe a little self-preservation too, like, it's just God who interprets it, not me. So if this is bad for you, take it easy on me. I'm just a messenger, right? But yeah, so he does kind of step out because if this is an unfavorable interpretation, Pharaoh could have easily just killed him.
Absolutely. So off of the killing conversation, but it's just part of how it all goes. But some of the things that I think is very interesting, especially in this space right here, for why everyone's here, is musicals. And there are so many biblically inspired or based or inspired, we can pick whatever word makes the most sense, musicals that are great. I mean, there's Jesus Christ Superstar, Children of Eden, Joseph. There's so many out there. How do you feel about taking or using biblical text, biblical inspiration, and then using it to reach the masses of an audience like this, with the fun, the joy, the darkness? I mean, Jesus Christ Superstar is pretty dark in those moments, but what do you feel about that moment of pop culture partnering with the Bible?
Oh, I think it's very important. I think if we go back and read these stories, in their day and age, they were cutting edge. They used these kind of techniques within the words to draw attention to certain things and bring certain things about. We miss those now because we're 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years later. So we go back and we miss those, especially being translated into English. But the text was even doing innovative things at the time to get people's attention and make us go, wait, why is that there, right? So I think as we take in this next step, putting these scriptures to music, I think is an incredible way to remember them. We are musically minded people. That works for us. I can't tell you how many scriptures I have that I've learned songs to, but that's how I can't read them without singing it. Right? Every time I read it, I sing it. So I think it's an incredible use of scripture, and it brings people in who might not otherwise see the story or know the story. So I'm incredibly excited about how pop culture is interacting with the Bible. And I'm really grateful to Michael for bringing in kind of faith leaders to help inform this version of Joseph. I think that's incredibly important as well.
I think it was and the best word for me to say is responsible of Michael to reach out to so many from different faith backgrounds, different denominations, to get all the perspective. I think on this story, I think he's told this every day, so I'll tell it because I'm here. He was going and doing a little research, as you do when you're making a show, and he reached out to one of the religious leaders and said, I found the names of all the wives for Joseph. And she said, you did what? And he's like, yeah. She's like, well, where did you find them? He said, the internet. So he was like, it's on the internet, don't you, right? Yes. And she was like, let me do some research. She did a little bit. Was like, well, kind of. Yeah, but instead of just like deciding to name everybody here, he reached out to people. And I think that's the beauty of building a strong community of faith, but also just a community in general where you can reach out to others and say, is this real?
Absolutely. And one of the first conversations we had, I had lunch with Michael and then Rabbi Barrett Harris over at the Temple tonight. And so we sat across the table from each other, and Michael kind of posed this question about Joseph. And she and I started going back and forth just in our different faith traditions about how we interpreted the story of Joseph. And then I remember her saying a couple things, and I was like, I have never looked at that part of the story that way. And then we just kind of had a conversation about that for a few minutes, and I learned a lot on my perspective of Joseph by sitting down and hearing hers. And so I think as we do this together, it's just such an incredible opportunity to learn how different faith traditions view this story and how we can learn from each other in those situations.
Absolutely. For those that are just now arriving, you may be saying, why are these two guys sitting on the stage talking instead of dancing? You don't want to see us dance.
No, you do not.
Number two, we are having a little talk session before every show about Joseph, and we've brought in religious leaders, and this is Jared. I'll let you reintroduce yourself to the new people that have walked in.
Yeah, I'm Jared Chambers, and I'm the location pastor at Crossings Mayfair, Crossings Community Church, Mayfair location, which is Northwest Expressway in Penn, just up the road from here.
So we wanted to make sure we had some time where you can hear from these scholars and people who have a little bit more information than some other people, so we can share that with you all as we delve into this story of Joseph and the wild, zany fun it is, but there's also some very, very important things that you'll hear in the message too that you can take with you. So another question I'll ask is, do you think of Joseph as the hero of this story?
No.
No.
Okay.
I think he's a hero of the story. I think the hero of the story is God. And I think Joseph even kind of gives credit to this at the end of the story. We've mentioned, and people read the story different ways, but when I read the beginnings of the story of Joseph, I do see some ego, some bravado. I see some moments where he makes some steps that I don't know if I would have taken, especially if my dad is kind of treating me as the favorite. I might tread lightly around my older brothers who are bigger and stronger and more numerous than me. Joseph doesn't seem to do that, and he just ignores that. So I do think Joseph makes some missteps. And even in the story with Potiphar's wife, where she says, come to bed with me, and Joseph doesn't say, no, I am committed to my relationship with God. That would be unethical, immoral. I'm not going to do that. Joseph's answer is, I'm kind of in charge of everything, and that would be difficult for me if I got caught, right?
Right.
So I think Joseph does make some missteps. He's human. That's one of the great parts of the story is Joseph's relatable because he's human, and he does human things. Like, we say things in bravado sometimes that we shouldn't, just like Joseph did. All that to say, I think in the end of the story, there's kind of this famous passage, this famous quote from Joseph that sometimes gets misinterpreted, but as Joseph is in front of his brothers and he says, don't worry, I don't hold a grudge against you. He says, you intended to harm me, but God, and then I think some of the translations say, intended it for good, or God used it for good. And so I think even there at the end, Joseph gives credit to God as being the hero of the story and saying, I got thrown in a pit, I got put in jail, people tried to besmirch my name and say bad things against me, but through all of that, God brought me to this place. And I think that's where that earlier lesson I was talking about comes from, that we might be in the pit, but that doesn't mean that's the end of the story. And sometimes it's even outside of our might to be able to do that sort of thing. So I think the hero of the story, in my opinion, is God. But I do think Joseph plays a role as one of the heroes by the time we get to the end.
I love the fact, especially in this story, and just in our biblical stories, when he's on stage, you'll see Joseph as obviously the protagonist.
Yeah.
But there's moments of, you talked about his ego kind of goes up and down, and you see these moments of maybe the pit humbled him a little bit. But that didn't mean his ego didn't pop up again later. So we get to the end of the story, instead of saying, guys, it's me. What does so what he does, he tortures him a little bit.
Oh, yeah,
he
makes some, he wanted to teach them a lesson, right? So now, we could say, it's better than what he could have done.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
He could have just taken it out on them and been here I am, and here you are. Now look how the tables have turned. Get out of here, right? He does take care of them, but he does put them through their faces a little bit, and he makes them sweat. He puts the cup in Benjamin's sack and threatens to make his dad keel over out of worry and all this sort of thing. But he does show up at the end for them. We see his emotion. In the biblical story, once he realizes that it's his brothers, he steps back and cries. He steps away from them and weeps. He understands the weight of the situation that he's in. He doesn't do it. He doesn't just absolve them. He does kind of teach them a lesson, which is on par with ancient Hebrew culture. He's human, right? He's human, right? But he wants them to learn something from this also. But then he does step up in a big way and help really save his family, and not just his family, but the rest of the people from the place he's in.
Do you think there are correlations with the ancient story of Joseph that still ring true today? Not just the sibling rivalries, but things that we hear in this text and what we'll see on this stage that we kind of see modern day. If it's within families, it's just in the world we live in.
Yeah. Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the big takeaways from the story is that life has its ups and downs, and every journey has its pits and its shortcomings. And as I was, even going back through the story of Joseph again in preparation for this, I was reading that and I thought about those times where I felt distant from God, or that I felt like, man, if I could just get out of this pit, for lack of a better term, right? If I could get out of this situation, life would be so much better. Or even moments where I felt like I was in a situation that was not my own fault. Like with Potiphar's wife, like Joseph really did what he was supposed to do. He said no, he said no, he said no. And then she rips his coat off and then, kind of betrays him and smears his name and he gets thrown in jail. And in that moment, if you're Joseph, you have to be going like, God, where are you? Right? Like, what is happening to my life? And I think everyone in this room can relate to that moment of being, what is happening in my life right now? And so I think that is a timeless truth that as we see it take place in Joseph's story, we can learn from it as well.
I don't want to spend too much time. I know we'll have to wrap up pretty quickly, but is there anything that you want to specifically say about what you're currently doing in your congregation, or about the story that you'd like to share with the group here? I'm almost at congregation here.
So at Crossings Mayfair, we are really priding ourselves on trying to be a neighborhood church the best we can for. We're building is situated in a bunch of houses, and so we're doing some things upcoming. We have a great food pantry. So if you know someone who's struggling with food insecurity, they can come to Crossings Mayfair, 2340 Northwest 50th Street. We have a food pantry there and an incredible volunteer named Greg who puts all that together. So we have a great resource of food that people can give. On the second and fourth Saturdays of each month, we have our big distributions. We have fresh produce and things like milk sometimes when we can get it, and frozen meat and all sorts of great stuff. So if you know someone suffering from food insecurity, please send them our way. And then we're a partner with James Monroe Elementary, which is right around the corner. If you've never heard about James Monroe, it's an incredible place. Kindergarten through fourth grade, and they have 14 different native languages at that school.
Wow.
It's incredible. So this next year in the fall, we're going to be helping tutor reading skills with some of those students. So if you're a retired teacher or just you have some free time and you would like to help local kids learn how to read better, then please come and see us. We would love to put you to work.
That's great. This story is a story of families growing apart, coming together, figuring things out, and that's kind of what you see, especially in Genesis and the Old Testament for long, figuring out what's next. So this is a wonderful time where if you're questioning, it's okay to have your questions and you're worried about faith and dig a little bit into your faith, or just be curious and say, hey, I want to know what happens after the musical.
Yeah.
He didn't write a sequel and a musical version of it, but that doesn't mean you can't find more information on your own and do a little digging.
Absolutely.
I want to say thank you all for listening to me blabber and get some wisdom from Jared here. We are going to get off the stage. You all can get ready for a wonderful, wonderful show. So thank you all very much.